Hey everybody, what's going on? So today we're going to be covering the newest unit as of version 2.5, and that would be Cherish. I know most of you probably passed on him, but if possible, I would like to try and get every unit so I can cover him on the channel, at least to some degree. And so hopefully, if you join me in pulling for him, this helps you out a little bit. But I'm going to try and get through this in a reasonable amount of time, so without further ado, let's jump into the video. So starting off with some of the baseline stuff, Cherish is an Ice Element Guardian unit with his persona Amalthea, and Guardian units are typically a lot like what we would consider to be tank units in other games, and Cherish is no different. He will mainly be providing your team with lots of sustain in the form of shields and defense boosting, while also passively providing your team with some damage up capabilities as part of his kit. And speaking of his kit, I think the best place to start when diving into a character in this game is typically going to be the A0. The A0 lays the foundation for what the character is going to be doing, and it helps to define some of the terms and language used in the character's other skills that could be important in understanding generally what the character is doing. So for Cherish, his basic A0 ability, Noble Knight of Flowers, is at the start of battle going to be granting allies Knight's Protection, which is a shield that's equal to 12% of Cherish's defense, plus an additional flat number based on Cherish's character level, with 70 being the cap. Additionally, when an ally who has Knight's Protection takes an attack from an enemy, Cherish will be granted a stack of Heroism. Heroism can stack up to 2 times in one turn and 4 times total. So what does Heroism do and why do you want it? So if Heroism is at the max 4 stacks at the start of Cherish's turn, he will spend all stacks and reapply Knight's Protection, as well as gain Garden of Promises. This will let you hopefully start getting Heroism stacks again with Knight's Protection, as well as make use of Garden of Promises, which we'll cover a little bit more when we get to Cherish's other skills next. And for now, we're going to move away from Cherish's awarenesses. We'll come back to them in a little bit, but like I said, the A0 is typically pretty important in laying the groundwork for understanding the rest of the kit, so I like to cover it first. But moving into Cherish's actual skills, we can start with his first skill on the list, which is going to be Frost Vines. So Frost Vines is going to be an AoE damage skill, Cherish's only offensive skill, which will deal ice damage to the main target based on his defense stat, and then damage to other targets for a lesser percentage of his defense. The skill also has a high chance to inflict freeze at nearly 100% to the main target, and the use of this skill will gain Cherish 2 Heroism stacks. And now here's where the reading of the A0 first comes in handy, because remember that Garden of Promises stack you'd get from Cherish at 4 Heroism stacks? If you have that active when Cherish uses Frost Vines, it'll increase the main target's damage taken by 2% for every 600 points of Cherish's defense, up to nearly 20% breakpoint for 2 turns. So not only is it going to be doing damage, it will also be applying a damage taken up on whatever Cherish's main target ends up being. Typically, I would say Cherish's skill 1 wouldn't get much play, as if you were going to be using him on the teams that I think he will best fit, he'll be trying to do defense buffing and providing shields most of the time, but considering that from CN to Global, they did nearly double his damage up potential from this skill, perhaps there is some circumstances where it'll find a little bit more value, but for the most part, I don't think you're going to be using this one all that much. Moving on from a skill that will likely only see marginal play to a skill that will be a mainstay in Cherish's rotation, especially on a Fox team where Cherish really shines, but we'll get into that a little bit later. For now, let's dive into Cherish's skill 2, named Hoarfrost Vow. Hoarfrost Vow will grant one ally the Knight's Protection Shield, the same one from his A0, based on Cherish's defense, then buff that unit's defense stat by 20% of Cherish's own defense, up to a max of 1220 for 2 turns. The breakpoint here is going to be 6100 defense for Cherish. That is going to be the number you're going to want his defense stat at, so that you get the most out of all of his buffs. We'll cover that a little bit more once we get to his build a little bit later on. Additionally, if the target has more than 60% of their HP remaining, increase target rate by 50%. Additionally, at the start of Cherish's next turn, grant 1 Knight's Protection again to the same target. If Garden of Promises is active, increase shield granted from Knight's Protection by 25% for 2 turns. Without digging too deep into the weeds on the Fox team here, you can see the synergy these two have just from this skill. Defense buffing, shielding, drawing aggro to help Fox proc his follow-ups. It's everything Fox wants kind of in one skill. Additionally, even without Fox, just from a sustain perspective, this could allow you to make a unit tankier and let them draw aggro to help your other units survive. Also, this buff lasting 2 turns makes it very easy to rotate between it and the skill 3, which we're going to hop into right now. And that skill 3 in Cherish's final skill is called Winter Fortress, and it is an AoE shielding skill. It will grant all allies 1 Knight's Protection shield equal to 12% of his defense, plus a flat number based on his character level, as well as a much heftier shield called Knight's Resolve, which is nearly 50% of Cherish's defense, plus a flat 1400. Seems pretty straightforward so far, but the most interesting aspect of this skill is it will also provide all allies a down point, which allows them to not be knocked down by critical hits or weakness hits one time, plus increases damage dealt by 2.9% for every 300 points of Cherish's defense, up to nearly 57% for 2 turns, with a 1-turn mandatory cooldown. You'll likely want to just be rotating the skill 3 and skill 2 the entire fight with Cherish. Since they're both 2-turn buffs, you'll spend a lot of time just upkeeping them. As for Cherish's highlight, it basically just grants a large shield to all allies, decreases their damage taken by 30% for 2 turns. Outside of emergency survivability, I don't know how much use the highlight's going to get. It seems kind of underwhelming in terms of value outside of just big shields. Now we can dive into his 2 talents, because as part of his buffs for global, the talents did see a nice little bump and have been slightly changed in what they do. So firstly, you have Flower Knight's Shield, which when allies have a shield granted by Cherish, increase defense by 24%, so a nice passive defense boost in addition to whatever shielding and defense boosting his skill was already doing. Plus, shielded allies also have ailment resistance increased by 48%, which seems kind of random, but it plays into the new part of his other talent, Flower Knight's Devotion. So Flower Knight's Devotion, while Cherish is not KO'd, basically will be granting 1, 2, or 3 buff stacks to an ally when that ally uses their ailment resistance to avoid being inflicted by an ailment. So they list curse, elemental ailments, and spiritual ailments here as things that can proc this buff. The buff you will be getting is a 10% damage up for 2 turns, which can stack up to 3 times, and if you do get 3 stacks, that ally's crit damage is also boosted by 20% for 2 turns. So it's a little bit confusing, but basically I think they wanted to try and give Cherish a way to passively boost damage and try to make him more useful outside of just the Fox team. So to do that, they gave him a big ailment resistance buff for shielding allies, and then buffs based on that ailment resistance. The problem I have with this is that it's not really something you can control. If the enemy doesn't use a skill where they're inflicting ailments, it's not really possible to proc these buffs. Now, will they likely be putting in SOS and guild bosses that make sure they do try and inflict ailments so this becomes more useful? Of course they will. For that, yeah, this will be very good. But I still wish it was based on something a little bit more consistent, or at least something that's a little more in your control, rather than having to depend on the enemy to proc it for you. Still, I think it's a unique effect, and it's a good buff, and I think whenever they have an opportunity to orchestrate a boss fight where they can let you proc this effect as much as possible, they're going to. And then with all that said, we can loop back to Cherish's awarenesses. I think we can try and move quickly through these, though, because I don't want to spend too much time here. I really don't know if anybody's going to be purposefully duping this character out, at least not until he's on the standard banner in 6 months. But starting with his A1, it will give Cherish 3 heroism stacks right off the bat to start the fight, while also dropping the required heroism stacks to activate Garden of Promises to 3. So he basically starts the fight with a free instance of Garden of Promises at A1. Also increases the party's crit rate by a flat 20%, so quite good. At A2, you'll be getting flat percentage boosts to defense, damage dealt, and crit damage for every knight's protection shield up to 2 stacks. Also adds some healing to the target when their shields fall off, similar to how Leon's skill 2, when his shields go away, they heal the user back up a little bit. At A3, you just have the normal skill level breakthrough, so nothing to really say here. A4 will boost the shields granted by Cherish's highlight by 30% for 2 turns. Again, not sure how useful his highlight's actually going to be. I don't see it getting much use, at least not in SOS and guild boss situations. So this one doesn't do a ton for me personally. Moving into the A5, you will get the other 2 skills level breakthroughs similar to the A3. And then at A6, they add a new buff called Poise, which will activate when Cherish gains Garden of Promises. So whenever Cherish gets the Garden of Promises, he will also get Poise, which increases the party's crit rate by 15%, which obviously is pretty useful. I actually don't think his awarenesses overall are that crazy, but when you consider he is a standard unit, and at some point, he will be on the standard banner, and we will start losing 50-50s to him, or we'll be able to get him from that 165 thing from the 110 banner. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I think they make these standard banner characters' awarenesses a little more tame, because a lot more people will actually be getting awarenesses for the characters once they're on the standard, versus someone like a Queen, where the A6 is not something you can just accidentally get. Needless to say, I don't think you should be pulling for dupes on Cherish unless you're just a whale and you just A6 everything. Whenever he is added to the standard, people will start to get dupes naturally without having to spend premium currency, which is kind of the same argument against pulling for him in general, but we'll kind of wrap around back to that at the end of the video. Moving on from his awarenesses, let's move into his weapons. So starting with his 3-star weapon, maybe I'm crazy, but at full forge, I actually don't think it's that bad. It's just a flat 32% defense buff, but considering his buffs all scale on defense up to a point, I really don't think it's all that bad, especially compared against the 4-star, because the 4-star is not buffing defense at all. The 5-star is obviously going to be his best in slot, but like I said, from 3-star to 4-star, I'm not sure I would like totally discount the 3-star's usage. So with that said, what does the 4-star actually do, and why do I think it's maybe not a slam dunk over the the 3-star. So the 4-star is going to be increasing shielding by 16.5% and also increases shield Cherish gives to allies with HP under 60%. That's at full forging. So here's my issue with the 4-star. In most situations for SOS or Guild Boss, you'll likely be running Cherish with Fox, and Fox doesn't really care how much shield you give him, he only really cares about the instance of shielding. So when a weapon's providing more shield, and yes, I know his kit revolves around people having his Knight's Protection shield to give him stacks of heroism, but I do find it kind of hard to believe he won't be getting stacks of heroism regularly enough from his passive shielding plus his 2 other skills, which are also shielding. Maybe I'm overrating the ability of him to shield with his skills, or underrating the difficulty of getting the heroism stacks without playing him much yet, but I struggle to see a way he isn't doing enough shield regardless of the weapon. Now, if you want to talk about things outside of SOS and Guild Boss as a pure sustainer, of course the 4-star is going to be much better. It's giving you more shield, it's making you tankier. Additionally, if you're at the defense threshold of 6100 for Cherish, then there's no point in having a more defense buffing because he won't benefit anymore from that. But I don't know, I don't think the 3-star is that bad. Though if you want to skip the entire conversation and just pull the 5-star, it of course will be his best in slot weapon. It provides a flat 45% defense up and also increases the Knight's Protection shielding, essentially doing what the fully forged 3 and 4 stars do combined, but better at R0. Additionally, the 5-star will increase the target's damage dealt by 8% for each Knight's Protection shield, granted up to 2 stacks. Obviously a really good weapon, and we won't cover the forge levels for it because I don't really think anyone's going to be pulling for forge levels on this, but it basically just buffs all the stat bonuses that the R0 gives. Do I think you need it? I do think it helps Cherish quite a bit, but again, it's hard to recommend people invest premium currency heavily into this character when he will eventually be on the standard banner and his weapon available on the standard banner as a 50-50 loss chance. I think you could certainly make do with his other weapons, most of his value is coming from his kit anyway, especially with Fox. The weapon is just enhancing stats essentially, not changing the way the unit is being played. Let's move on to his card sets next, and I think the best card set for him is going to be Faith and Peace, with Trust and Prosperity being maybe a secondary backup option, though I do think Faith and Peace works best considering there's so many other units that are likely already going to be running Trust and Prosperity that you have, especially some of the ones I imagine Cherish will usually be sharing a team with. And as for what stats you want to be pushing on each card individually, the answer is going to be defense. You want as much defense as possible for Cherish up to the breakpoint of 6100. That 6100 number will allow you to get max value out of Cherish's skills, so you're going to want to do what you can to get as close to that 6100 number as possible. And you can see my cards here. I need to farm cards pretty badly. I had horrible luck on substat rolls outside of the cards that I stole from my puppet, but my Cherish is way too fast, so if you see his speed stat, ignore. It's just a bad substat luck. They will be changed when I start to farm new cards. Again, the only stat you're really going to want to push for on Cherish is defense. You want it as the main stat on every card outside of the Sun card, because Sun is the only card that can't have defense as a main stat. But otherwise, you want it as a main stat and as many substats as you can. Like I said, up to 6100, that's very important. That number will go up once the inner track of Mindscape comes through, or if you dupe Cherish out far enough that the skill levels get broken through. A0, as it stands right now in the game, 6100 is going to be that magic number for Cherish's defense. And then speaking of skill levels, as far as priority of skill levels go, his skill 2 and skill 3 are about equal in my book, and I think Cherish's rotation is going to just be those 2 skills being rotated. His skill 1 and highlight, I think you can put on the back burner for now. I wouldn't say they're totally useless, but I just struggle to see where they are going to fit in over the skill 2 and skill 3, especially with those 2 skills being 2-turn buffs. And then just briefly, we'll touch on Mindscape again. Once we get to the point where it's unlocked, like the inner track is fully unlocked, I'll make sure to make those a much bigger part of these videos going forward. But for right now, we're kind of just going to ignore the minuscule stat buffs that you're getting from the outer track because they're just not all that substantial. Next, we can look at Cherish's preferred teams. So who does Cherish want to be playing with? Well, if you couldn't already tell, the answer is going to be Fox. Cherish is essentially made to be Fox's sidekick. He does everything Fox is looking for: shields, defense, damage boost, you name it, he's doing it all at the same time. They're a perfect 1-2 pairing, and you can slot them in as a duo with a couple of different teammate options. If you want to go for like a mega defense team, you could do like a Cherish Yuki, though you may start to see diminishing returns with too much defense buffing with both of them on the same team. Another option is going to be Cord. Cord is pretty much universal, but Cord can definitely help keep Yusuke's highlight active to guarantee follow-ups, while Cherish takes on the joint role of being the defense buffer and shield instance provider for Fox. Even someone like Rin to give additional defense shred could work. Considering Cherish plays all the roles Fox is looking for by himself, it makes that extra teammate slot pretty open to test to see what the best value you can find with a third unit would be. So let's wrap this one up with my final thoughts. I think the should you pull Cherish conversation has kind of been beat to death at this point, especially with the long patch before. He was one of the only things to talk about. I think he really is just going to be a skip for most people just because of his limited meta use outside of Fox. But I do think if you're a newer player and need a sustainer for the story and other content, as you work through the game, he could actually be a good one to pull since you'll be getting a lot of currency early in the game when you start, and he'll probably just make your life a little bit easier. It was a point Watts had brought up to me in my discussion with him and the rest of the farmers market group, and I agreed with him on it wholeheartedly, and that's kind of my new motto on Cherish for new players. For the rest of us, though, he's probably a skip, as is his weapon. There's just too many good units coming up to justify spending currency on him, unless you're like a mid to high level spender, and even then I would consider saving up your money for what's to come if you're looking at just purely account value. I pulled him and the weapon for the channel because I want to cover everything the game has to offer if possible, and even I set myself a hard 50-50 boundary. If I lose the 50-50 for him or the weapon, that's it, I'm done, I'm not chasing him. Luckily, I got lucky for once, and I actually pulled him and the weapon, which is my luck. Now the next character that I actually want, I won't be able to get. I would not have gone through a 110 or a 160 for him, even for the channel. It's just too expensive, especially with all the characters that are going to be coming out. And that's all I have on this one. Hopefully I was able to get through this in a reasonable amount of time. There's just so much to cover in these character videos that it can get a little bit overwhelming, so hopefully I was able to do this in a timely fashion. But thank you for all your support. As always, I appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer whatever I can for you. Otherwise, I will see you on the next one, and have a good one.